over 50 years now, boys and girls and mums and dads have read and reread Kenneth Grahame's magical story of Mr. Toad and his friends Ratty, Mole and Badger. 4 animals who were sometimes so stupid and sometimes so wise that they were just like human beings. For those who've not yet had the pleasure of their company, and for the thousands who'd like to meet them again, this is the story of The Wind in the Willows. Badger and Mole were hurrying back to Toad Hall after their walk in the woods. So delighted had they been to be out in the open again, after several days of sitting around the hall guarding Toad and waiting for him to show some sign of repentance, that they'd lost all count of time. The Badger very much enjoyed the company of the Mole. In fact, the two of them seemed to understand each other very well, which was no doubt because they were both by nature underground animals, both fairly quiet and not great ones for a busy social life or idle conversation. But now, realizing they were late for lunch, they made haste through the fields and copses, over fences and across streams. At last they came to the driveway, and they strode up ready now for their meal, for the exercise and fresh air had given them a sharp appetite. "I think," said the Badger, "that I shall have with my food a glass of Toad's beer, nice, cool and—" The Badger stopped dead in his tracks. He was staring ahead of him, looking upwards towards the hall. "Bless my soul, whatever can that be?" he said. "If it's what I think it is, whatever can what be?" queried the Mole. "And what do you think it is?" "Up there, hanging from Toad's bedroom window," said the Badger. And the Mole looked up to see the knotted sheet, just as Toad had left it when he made his escape. What a gloomy luncheon it was for Rat. Very few words were spoken, and the Badger kept making angry grunting noises. Even the Mole, who'd taken his friend's side as far as possible, couldn't really understand how Toad had managed to outwit the Rat. And so the Rat sat at the table, crestfallen and ashamed, realizing that his story was both pitiful and unconvincing. Eventually the Mole spoke. "Ratty, I know how you must feel, and I'm sorry, but you've been a bit of a duffer this time. Toad, of all animals." "He did it awfully well," said the Rat. "He did you awfully well," rejoined the Badger. "Fancy him talking you into leaving the house, and then he escapes down a sheet. Still, talking won't mend matters. He's got clear away by this time, that's for certain. And the worst of it is he'll be so conceited with what he'll think is his cleverness that he may commit any folly. One comfort is that we're free now and needn't waste any more of our precious time doing sentry duty. But we'd better continue to sleep at Toad Hall for a while longer. Toad may be brought back at any moment, on a stretcher or between 2 policemen." So spoke the Badger, not knowing what the future held in store or how much water was to run under the bridges before Toad should sit at ease again in his ancestral hall. Meanwhile, Toad, gay and irresponsible, was walking briskly along the high road some miles from home. At first, he'd taken bypaths and crossed many fields and changed his course several times in case of pursuit. But now, feeling safe from recapture, with the sun shining brightly on him, he almost danced along the road in his satisfaction and conceit. "Smart piece of work, that," he remarked to himself. "Bless my soul, brain against brute force, and brain came out on top as it's bound to do. Poor old Ratty. My, won't he catch it when the Badger gets back. A worthy fellow, Ratty, with many good qualities, but very little intelligence and absolutely no education. I must take him in hand some day and see if I can make something of him." The sign of the Red Lion was swinging across the main street of the small town, and as he approached it, the Toad was reminded that he hadn't breakfasted that day and that he was exceedingly hungry after his long walk. So he entered the inn, ordered the best luncheon that could be provided at short notice, and sat down to eat it in the coffee room. He was about halfway through his meal when an old familiar sound, approaching down the street, made him start trembling all over. The noise drew nearer and nearer, and then the car could be heard to turn into the yard and come to a stop. What music that sound was in the toad's ears. Then the passengers entered the room, hungry, talkative and gay, voluble on their experience of the morning and the merits of their car that had brought them along so well. Toad could stand it no longer. Leaving the money for his meal on the table, he slipped out of the room and into the courtyard and stood gazing at the magnificent motor car in front of him. "There can't be any harm," he said to himself, "in my just looking at it." And so he gazed as in a dream. I wonder, he thought, if this sort of car starts easily. Next moment, hardly knowing how it came about, he found he had hold of the handle and was turning it. As the engine roared into life, the old passion seized on Toad and completely mastered him, body and soul. He threw himself into the car, and his eyes gleamed as he saw before him the mass of switches and controls set in a gleaming wooden dashboard. But by now, the party in the inn had heard the engine and were staring in horror from the window and shouting. But the Toad heard nothing, nothing save the glorious roar from the engine, and in his mind was the sight of the open road once more, the open road that lay just around the corner. Even as the irate driver raced from the inn to stop him, the Toad drove the car from the courtyard. All sense of right and wrong, all fear of obvious consequences seemed temporarily suspended. He increased his pace, sat back in style, and the car leapt forth onto the high road. He was Toad once more. Toad at his best and highest. Toad the terror. Toad the traffic queller. The lord of the lone trail, before whom all must give way or be smitten into nothingness and everlasting night. He chanted as he flew, and the car responded with a steady and powerful drone of its engine. The miles were eaten up under him as he sped he knew not whither, fulfilling his instincts, living his hour, reckless of just what might come to him. "To my mind," observed the judge, "the only difficulty that presents itself in this otherwise very clear case is how we can possibly make it sufficiently hot for the incorrigible rogue and hardened ruffian whom we see cowering in this dock before us. Now, let me see. He's been found guilty on the clearest evidence. First, of stealing a valuable motor car. Secondly, of driving to the public danger. And thirdly, of gross impertinence to the rural police. Mr. Clark, will you tell us, please, what is the very stiffest penalty we can impose for each of these offences? Without, of course, giving the prisoner the benefit of any doubt, because there isn't any." The clerk scratched his nose with his pen. "Some people would consider," he observed, "that stealing the motor car was the worst offence, and so it is. But cheeking the police undoubtedly carries the severest penalty. And so it ought. Supposing you were to say 12 months for the theft, which is mild, and 3 years for the furious driving, which is lenient, and 15 years for the cheek, which was pretty bad sort of cheek, judging by what we've heard from the witness box. Even if you only believe 1/10th part of what you've heard, and I never believe more myself, these figures, if added together correctly, tot up to 19 years. "First rate," said the judge. "So you'd better make it around 20 years and be on the safe side," concluded the clerk. "An excellent suggestion," said the judge approvingly. "Prisoner, pull yourself together and try and stand up straight. It's going to be 20 years for you this time, and mind, if you appear before us again, upon any charge whatever, we shall have to deal with you very seriously." Then the brutal minions of the law fell upon the hapless Toad, loaded him with chains, and dragged him from the courthouse, shrieking, praying, protesting, across the marketplace, where the playful populace, always as severe upon detected crime as they are sympathetic and helpful when one is merely wanted, assailed him with jeers, carrots, and popular catchwords. Past hooting children, their innocent faces lit up, with the pleasure they ever derived from the sight of a gentleman in difficulties. Across the hollow-sounding drawbridge, below the spiky portcullis, under the frowning archway of the grim old castle, whose ancient towers soared high overhead, past guardrooms full of grinning soldiers off duty, past sentries who coughed in a horrid, sarcastic sort of way, because that's as much as a sentry on his post dare do to show his contempt and abhorrence of crime. Up time-worn winding stairs, past men-at-arms in corselets of steel, across courtyards where mastiffs strained at the leash and pawed the air to get at him, past ancient warders, dozing over a pasty and a flagon of ale. On they went, until they reached the door of the grimmest dungeon that lay in the heart of the innermost keep. There at last they paused, where an ancient jailer sat fingering a bunch of mighty keys. "Odd bodkins," said the sergeant of police, taking off his helmet and wiping his forehead. "Rouse the old loon and take over from us this vile toad, a criminal of deepest guilt and matchless artfulness and resource. Watch him and ward him with all thy skill. And mark thee well, greybeard. Should aught untoward befall, thy old head shall answer for it." The jailer nodded grimly, laying his weathered hand on the shoulder of the miserable toad. The rusty key croaked in the lock. The great door clanged behind them. And Toad was a helpless prisoner in the remotest dungeon of the best guarded keep of the stoutest castle in all the length and breadth of merry England.